Well, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for the nice introduction. I'm a little bit afraid that you've said everything I was going to say, but I'll try to provide a few details, but also to take questions as you go. And I think that this would work best if you have questions, if you ask questions as we go. I know that a number of you know this literature as well as I do, so if you have further questions, please bring them up as we go. I'm going to try to cover a broad range of topics, and to start by putting it in the context of the economic issues that are involved. I know that this is a terrible time to try to talk about long-run changes in governments and so forth when you have people talking about 57% unemployment rates for youth. It's hard to talk about the future and what you do in the long run. At the same time, I'm going to argue, as I do in the United States, where I make very similar discussions, that the future of Spain, as the future of the United States is, depends upon the skills and quality of its labor force, which is really about the human capital development in the schools. And if that is ignored because all of the attention is sucked away by the current economic conditions, you will face a bleak future 20 years from now, and wonder what can we do 20 years from now to get out of this bleak situation. So that's the message that I've been trying to give in the United States, where our current economic crisis is not as large as yours is, but it is taking all of the energy of the United States to talk about what is this month's unemployment rate without considering the long-run situation. So let me try to summarize some things, but again, if you have questions along the way or things that aren't clear, please ask me as we go. So the overview is that I think that there's been a real explosion in consideration of how the education system can function better, of research that is directly related to the outcomes of education. In the United States, as in Spain, as in throughout Europe and other places, there's been a vast expansion of researchers who are looking at education issues now. It's not that they didn't think that education was important in the past, but what has happened is that we have lots of new data now that allow us to make the kinds of evaluations and assessments that I think are central to any improvement in the educational system. What I'm going to try to do today, which may not satisfy anybody, but I'm going to try to give an overall summary of some of the research in important policy areas and in the areas that relate to your new Education Act that's being prepared. And we can go into detail as we want. The one thing that we found once we have the data is that many of our firmly held beliefs about what works in education and what doesn't are just overturned. We have found that many of the things that we have just said over and over and repeated don't come through in the data. And that's what I want to talk about in many ways. In the United States, the way this has evidenced itself recently is that state legislatures, where most of the educational policy is made in the United States, are now demanding evidence before they pass acts. They're now demanding to know why do you believe this is the way we should go and that this is going to improve our system? I think this is very healthy. It also puts a lot of pressure on researchers to actually do work that is relevant and that is supportable and that can withstand the scrutiny of other researchers. So let me go into the substance here. This is a picture that I'm sure that everybody in this room knows. This is a listing of countries in order of PISA scores in mathematics in 2009. We'll soon have new results, but I highlight, if I can figure out how to, I can't figure out how to do this. Somehow there should be something that points, but anyways, I've colored. The United States is the red stripe bar, and Spain is the green stripe bar. And you can tell that it's far away from Shanghai, which I'm not sure how to interpret Shanghai, but it's far away from Singapore, Hong Kong, Finland, Switzerland, and so forth on that end, and proudly beating Italy and Latvia, and down to Peru. But the countries that we think of ourselves as competing with are the ones to the left. Now, lots of people argue that the PISA tests don't mean anything. These are tests that don't relate to what people do on jobs, and jobs take other requirements of how do you work with people and so forth. What I want to do is first to assert that that position is just flat wrong. It may be that there are lots of other aspects of jobs and for individuals, but at a national level, if I look at test scores versus growth rates, I find that there is a strikingly strong relationship. Now let me explain this graph to you because it motivates a lot of what we're going to do. It says on the horizontal axis, these are conditional test rates, test scores. Think of those as PISA test scores. In a minute I'll explain what conditional means. And growth rates. And you all know that the importance of growth rates. I don't have to explain that here. Conditional means that in the background of this is a very simple statistical analysis that relates the long-term growth rate of a country, the increase in annual GDP per capita of the country over a 40-year period. So it's the long run. It's not what happens tomorrow, but it's the long run. And conditional simply means that it also includes measures of where the country started. So this is growth between 1960 and 2000, and it considers what is the level of GDP per capita in 1960. So why does it do that? Well, if you start behind, it's easy to grow fast because all you have to do is copy what everybody else does. If you start ahead, you have to invent new things. You have to innovate. But once you take into account the position where people started, you see that growth rates are almost completely explained by test scores, some combination. And behind this, there's a machine that puts together PISA tests and TIMSS tests and all the tests that have been made. But think of it as PISA tests. And so down at the bottom end here is South Africa and Peru. And you get Philippines and Argentina. And then you get up to Korea and Hong Kong and Singapore. You get to Spain in the middle, right on this line. Spain is no different than the rest of the world. It follows this same relationship, that the quality of the human capital of your country determines your growth rate. Now, what's this all mean? Let me go to a second thing that might bother some. But this is the same graph if I just put down years of schooling and growth rates. except for the fact that it takes into account what people know. If I didn't have measures like PISA that showed what people know, you would find a positive lines up there, but the countries would be scattered quite broadly. What this line says, and I have to admit, it took me 2 years to understand this picture. What this says is, if you go to school and you don't learn anything, it doesn't count. That's simply what it says. So there's no relationship between years of schooling and growth rates after we take into account the measures of the quality of the learning that takes place in the schools. So for this reason, I spend the rest of the talk is going to concentrate on test scores and achievement, because that is what the evidence suggests drives growth, or it's a good measure, a proxy. It's really the skills of the people, but they're proxied well by whether people can get good grades on math and science, whether they know math and science.